Steve McQueen was the king of cool. By the early 1970s, no one in Hollywood had more power, more swagger, or more control over his career. And then came an offer, a gritty, hard-hitting role that could have defined him forever. A role that would become one of the most iconic in cinema history, Dirty Harry. But McQueen said no. And that single decision opened the door for another actor, a man hungry to prove himself, to step in and change Hollywood forever. His name was Clint Eastwood. Today, we're diving into the story of how Steve McQueen's pride, ego, and refusal to play a San Francisco cop handed Eastwood the role of a lifetime. Why did McQueen walk away from a film that seemed tailor-made for him? What happened when Eastwood grabbed the part with both hands? And how did this one decision alter the careers of two legends and the future of American cinema? Stick around, because by the end of this story, you'll see why Dirty Harry didn't just make Clint Eastwood a legend. It also became one of Steve McQueen's greatest regrets. By the dawn of the 1970s, Steve McQueen wasn't just another actor. He was Hollywood's undisputed box office king. Known everywhere as the King of Cool, McQueen had mastered the art of blending raw masculinity with effortless charisma. His films weren't just movies. They were cultural events. Think about it. Bullitt in 1968 gave audiences one of the most iconic car chases in cinema history, redefining what an action thriller could look like. The Great Escape had already cemented him as a global superstar, the rebel who could steal every scene without even speaking. And the Thomas Crown Affair showed he wasn't limited to action. He could do suave, stylish, and romantic, all while keeping that edge of danger. By 1970, studios were lining up to throw money at him. His paycheck per film wasn't just impressive, it was historic. At his peak, McQueen became the highest-paid actor in the world, earning over $3 million a movie plus a percentage of the box office. That's not just stardom, that's power. And McQueen knew it. He was in the rare position of being able to dictate terms, how much screen time he got, how his name appeared in the credits, even how many lines his co-stars were allowed to have compared to his. Directors called him difficult, rivals called him arrogant. But to Steve McQueen it was simple. If you wanted him, you played by his rules. This was the man Warner Bros. Approached when they were developing a new kind of cop drama. A movie about a San Francisco detective named Harry Callahan, a character who was tough, cold, and unflinching in his pursuit of justice. The studio knew exactly who they wanted. To them, it wasn't just casting, it was obvious. Harry Callahan was Steve McQueen, and yet, despite being the most powerful man in Hollywood, McQueen would make a decision that stunned the industry. He would turn his back on Dirty Harry. In the late 1960s, Hollywood was changing. The polished, squeaky-clean heroes of the Golden Age were giving way to something grittier, darker, and closer to the chaos people saw in the streets. America was in turmoil, assassinations, protests, rising crime, and a growing distrust of authority. The movie industry knew it had to adapt. Audiences didn't want perfect heroes anymore. They wanted flawed men, anti-heroes, characters who mirrored the messy reality of the world outside. That's where Dirty Harry was born. The script followed Inspector Harry Callahan, a San Francisco cop with a .44 Magnum and a personal code of justice. He wasn't polished, he wasn't charming, and he certainly wasn't politically correct. He was ruthless, violent, and willing to do whatever it took to bring criminals down. This was no clean-cut lawman. This was a character built to shock, and the studio wanted a superstar to carry that shock factor. To them, there was one name that fit the bill: Steve McQueen. It made perfect sense. McQueen had already proven he could embody the tough, quiet rebel who operated outside the rules. In Bullitt, he played a San Francisco cop who set his own pace, who didn't take orders, who broke every convention. The chase scene alone had redefined what audiences expected from action cinema. For Warner Bros., casting McQueen as Harry Callahan felt like destiny. But there was a catch. McQueen had already been down this road before. In his mind, Dirty Harry wasn't a bold new step. It was a repeat of something he had already perfected. To him, Harry Callahan looked too much like Frank Bullitt with a bigger gun and a darker script. and Steve McQueen, at the height of his power, didn't repeat himself. So when the offer came across his desk, the King of Cool hesitated. And then he said no. That decision didn't just open the door for another actor. It set the stage for one of the greatest role takeovers in Hollywood history. On the surface, it seemed insane. Why would Steve McQueen, the man who was the embodiment of cool, the box office king who had just carried Bullitt to blockbuster success, refuse a role practically written for him? The truth is, McQueen's decision wasn't just about the script. It was about pride, ego, and control. First, McQueen despised the idea of repeating himself. He had already played a San Francisco cop in Bullitt, and he didn't want audiences to see him doing a retread. To him, Harry Callahan wasn't bold and new. He was just Bullitt with a nastier streak and a bigger gun. McQueen wanted variety, and he hated the idea of being typecast as just another cop. Second, there was the issue of billing and power. McQueen was at the very top of Hollywood, and with that came an obsession with how he was presented. He didn't want to share screen space with anyone who might steal his thunder. In fact, during his career, he often demanded changes to scripts to reduce his co-stars' lines and ensure he remained the center of attention. With Dirty Harry, Warner Bros. Wasn't willing to give him that same level of control. And then came the money. At this point, McQueen was pulling in over $3 million per picture plus box office percentages. He was the highest paid actor in the world. But Dirty Harry wasn't developed as a prestige project. It was a gritty crime thriller with a modest budget. Warner Bros. Wasn't prepared to pay McQueen his usual astronomical fee, and for Steve, that was a deal-breaker. Privately, there was also something deeper. McQueen had an ego, but he also had insecurities. Taking on another cop role might have felt too safe, too much like he was chasing his own success. McQueen wanted to be unpredictable, to stay one step ahead of the industry. To him, repeating a formula was the quickest way to lose his aura of cool, so McQueen walked away. He passed on Dirty Harry, confident that turning it down wouldn't hurt him. After all, he was Steve McQueen. He believed he could afford to say no. What he didn't realize was that his refusal had just opened the door for Clint Eastwood to step in and change the course of cinema history. When Steve McQueen said no, Warner Bros. Didn't panic. Hollywood in the early 1970s had a stable of tough guy actors who could pull off a cop role, but they needed someone with the right mix of grit, charisma, and unpredictability. Someone who could make audiences believe in a character as raw and uncompromising as Harry Callahan. That's when they turned to Clint Eastwood. At the time, Eastwood was already well known. He had built his reputation as the man with no name in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns and was starring on American TV and Rawhide. But compared to McQueen, Clint was still second tier in Hollywood's pecking order. He didn't have McQueen's box office draw, his magazine covers, or his global superstardom. What he did have was a cold intensity, a quiet menace that made him stand out from the typical leading man. When Eastwood read the script for Dirty Harry, he didn't hesitate. Where McQueen saw repetition, Eastwood saw opportunity. He saw a chance to step out of the Western saddle and into the modern urban landscape. He saw a character that matched his no-nonsense persona perfectly. And unlike McQueen, Eastwood wasn't hung up on the paycheck or the billing. He wanted the role. The gamble paid off immediately. When Dirty Harry hit theaters in 1971, it was explosive. The film shocked audiences with its brutal violence, unapologetic attitude, and Eastwood's icy performance. The line, "Do you feel lucky, punk?" became one of the most quoted in cinema history. Harry Callahan wasn't just a character, he was a phenomenon. For Clint Eastwood, the role was transformative. Overnight, he went from being a Western star to one of the biggest names in Hollywood. Dirty Harry didn't just elevate his career, it defined it. Over the next decade, Eastwood would return to the role 4 more times, building one of the most successful franchises in film history. And all of it, every sequel, every iconic moment, every box office hit, came because Steve McQueen had walked away. When Dirty Harry exploded in theaters in 1971, the box office numbers spoke louder than any critic. Clint Eastwood's cold, unflinching Harry Callahan pulled in audiences by the millions. The movie made nearly 10 times its budget, sparked fierce debate, and solidified Eastwood as the new face of Hollywood toughness. Suddenly, Clint wasn't just the Western star with a squint and a six-shooter. He was a cultural icon. And Steve McQueen? He was forced to watch from the sidelines. At first, McQueen brushed it off. He told friends he didn't need Harry Callahan. He already had Frank Bullitt. To him, Dirty Harry was just Bullitt 2.0, and repeating himself wasn't cool. But as the sequels rolled in, Magnum Force, The Enforcer, Sudden Impact, each one making millions and keeping Eastwood firmly in the spotlight, the sting became impossible to ignore. What made it worse was that the timing for McQueen couldn't have been more brutal. His own box office power was starting to slip. Le Mans, his passion project about racing, had flopped in 1971, draining his finances and damaging his reputation. While Clint Eastwood's star was rising higher than ever, McQueen's was wobbling. Behind closed doors, McQueen admitted regret. Some reports claim he privately told friends that passing on Dirty Harry had been a mistake. Others say he refused to even discuss the film, as if ignoring it would erase the truth. Either way, the damage was done. Eastwood had taken the role McQueen refused, and instead of sinking, he turned it into the defining role of his career. For audiences, the contrast was clear. Steve McQueen had been the king of cool, the rebel everyone admired. But Clint Eastwood was now the one filling theaters, commanding attention, and shaping the very idea of the modern anti-hero. The crown had shifted. It was a cruel irony. By turning down Dirty Harry to avoid being typecast, McQueen had handed away the role that could have cemented his legacy for another decade. And worse, he had given it to the one man who would use it to surpass him. In Hollywood, one choice can define a career. For Clint Eastwood, saying yes to Dirty Harry turned him into a legend. For Steve McQueen, saying no became one of his greatest missed opportunities. But here's the truth. Even without Harry Callahan, McQueen remained the king of cool. His legacy is built on films like The Great Escape, Bullitt, and The Magnificent Seven. Roles that captured the rebel spirit in a way no one else could. And maybe that's the irony. McQueen's refusal gave Eastwood his greatest role, but it also preserved McQueen's mystery. He stayed unpredictable, refusing to be boxed in. He left fans wondering what might have been, a legend defined as much by the parts he turned down as the ones he played. Two men, one role, one decision that changed the course of movie history.